Eric Gillis. He's graciously giving us his overall presentation about how, you have a handout you said too, or no?
Oh yeah, I do, yeah.
Yeah, why don't we start passing that out too. But he's got the rags to riches story of his start in high school working for a little company called Chick-fil-A, and he's made it into a very good family business with 2 stores. That is a trick in itself. I had the privilege in 1985. I had a business called the Executive Committee. Anybody ever heard of that? You probably haven't, but anyways, now it's called Vistage. And God led me to do that throughout the state of Florida, and we had 230 CEOs involved in 25 different groups around the state. And God told me to sell that business. But in 1985, I was looking to try to put a conference together like this, except a lot more people, in Orlando. And I said, what can I do to attract some top speakers of CEOs of companies that have really made it big in America? And so I came up with a list of 4 or 5, and 2 of them one was a guy named Sam Walton. Anybody heard of him before? Okay. He only had about 150 stores at the time or something like that, but he was rocking and rolling and moving across country. And the other one was Truett Cathy with Chick-fil-A, and so I wrote a letter to Truett Cathy saying, congratulations, you have won the Outstanding Achievement Award for America through the development of your business, and we would like you to speak at our conference. And he was very gracious, and he said he would come, and he did. In fact, I get to meet with him the morning before the conference started. I couldn't believe it was $5,000 for a franchise, or a licensed franchise anyway, with Chick-fil-A. And I said, wow, I must have missed my calling. But anyway, the other guy named Sam Walton, he got my letter and he wrote me back, which was really nice. There was things called letters before. Anybody heard of those? Have you seen a letter before? Anybody? It actually comes in the mail. There used to be a post office. Anyway, he wrote me back and said, wow, that's an honor. Thank you. I'd love to come and be there. But unfortunately, Joe, my dog, and I have a hunting trip planned that day, so I can't be with you. I still have that letter. I thought, and signed by him too, Sam Walton. Okay, but it shows what his values were, of course, which is fine. But anyway, Eric's got quite a story, starting out in high school and working for Chick-fil-A. Let's give him a big round of applause. Eric Gillis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Honored to be here. Thank you for all the content so far. I've been a rich recipient of this. Grateful to be here myself. And what John said, Truett Cathy my story with Chick-fil-A is really his story. I mean, I wouldn't have my opportunity without him. And I do want to share a little bit of that story with you. He's the founder of Chick-fil-A, if you don't know, and it's all about the founder, the founder's heart, the founder's mentality. And even though his grandson now is, 3rd generation, is now the CEO of the company, we still talk about Truett every day in our business. And I think that's a key to our success. The Chick-fil-A is still family owned. You can't buy stock in it. You can't invest in it. And the family, I think this is well known. He closed on Sundays. The family is as committed as they ever have been to Christian principles, to Christ. And so regardless of what you may have heard out there in news blurbs, because Chick-fil-A is clickbait on the internet, I, as a franchisee, am as confident as I've ever been that the values haven't changed at Chick-fil-A. Now, it's a big company. We're in almost every state. We're now in multiple countries. You're going to see decisions made inside Chick-fil-A that sometimes make me scratch my head. But at its core, what separates Chick-fil-A, going back to 1946, when Truett Cathy founded his first restaurant, is the commitment to biblical principles, and that hasn't changed. And so I want to share a little bit of that with you guys. Let's see if I can. This is my family right here. I had the privilege of opening my 2nd location about a year and a half ago. I have 2 locations. I grew up here in Jacksonville. My dream was to open a Chick-fil-A in Jacksonville when I first started back in 2006. And I didn't know how that would happen. 2010, I took a corporate job with Chick-fil-A. 2011, I became a franchise owner in Alabama. And I'll tell you a little bit of that story. And then 2015, I got to open Chick-fil-A Mandarin, which is San Jose and Oak Bluff, right near Target and 295. And then just last year, about 10 years after that, I got to open a second location, which is a huge, huge blessing. One was enough. Like, I love it. I love my job. I count it a privilege and a blessing. Of course, I had a hope for a second and more. But to be able to realize this dream in my hometown of 2 locations is truly a privilege. My 2 sons, 16 and 15, they do both work at Chick-fil-A. My daughter's more of a photo op here, but they're 13, 11, and 9. 13, 11, and 9 is my tallest, which is funny. My wife, Naomi, there. So this was at our grand opening August 2024. This is a picture of me and my wife in 2009 before we had kids, because that's kind of my story with Chick-fil-A. As John said, I grew up here in Mandarin, went to Mandarin High School at University of North Florida. And when I entered UNF, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. Like testimony we heard earlier, I grew up in the church, but I didn't know the Lord. I wanted to. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was morally good. My parents raised me to be that way. But I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was in college where my life took a turn of where I had really no vision, no purpose, that when I met the Lord and surrendered my life to Him in college as a 19-year-old, my life changed. You know, on the outside, you wouldn't have noticed a big change because, like I said, I was kind of going to church and I was doing the things. But as you all know, sitting in this room, if you've come to know the Lord, everything changed. And my passion became serving the Lord. And I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I knew I was going to serve the Lord in some way. So I spent time in short-term missions. I spent time as a church intern in the youth group. Along that path, I met my wife, Naomi, and I tell this to my 2 teenage sons now. The most important decision you'll make in life is choosing to surrender your life to the Lord. Second most important decision you'll make in life is who you marry. Choosing a godly spouse is the second most important decision because, as y'all know, every decision after that will be impacted by that decision. And so I'm thankful for my life's biggest blessing, besides knowing the Lord, for my wife, Naomi. We got married right after I graduated college, and the goal for me was to go to seminary. But we decided to not do that right away, or at least be married a year before we did anything crazy. And I got a regular job. I had never worked at Chick-fil-A at this point in my life. I had worked in restaurants, bus boy, serving tables, things like that as a high school and college student, but never, and honestly, hadn't even really eaten Chick-fil-A much. I didn't start eating Chick-fil-A until I was a college student. And I knew about Chick-fil-A on the peripheral. I knew closed on Sundays, knew the values, but I didn't really have any connection, anything like that with Chick-fil-A. So I started working this job outside of my first job outside of college. It was a cubicle job, 8 to 5, and I couldn't do it. And I knew I was going to do seminary, and we were serving in the youth group, and I thought, Lord, I think you're calling me to be a youth pastor or missions or something like that. I mean, that was where my head was at. And so I pursued Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. They have a satellite campus here in Jacksonville. It was very new at that point, and started going to getting my MDiv. I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I figured if I'm going to be in full-time ministry, I need to get that MDiv. So started doing that, and at the same time realized I know the job that I was in at that moment was not my future, and so I wanted to do something else. I was just looking for something to complement while I did my seminary degree. Started Chick-fil-A part-time just to test the waters. I loved it. It was very different from the restaurants I had worked at. I don't know if any of you worked at restaurants growing up, but when I was a teenager, 16 years old, I would go in and I wouldn't talk to anybody because everybody was cussing, drinking, hooking up. I mean, that's the restaurant culture, and that's not what I wanted to be a part of. When I stepped foot in Chick-fil-A and I realized, hey, when we're nice to customers and then they walk away, we don't cuss the customer out after they walk away. You know, like it's actually genuine. It's authentic. This is a positive environment. And I began to realize, hey, I think I could do this. And I was, bottom level. I started just bread and chicken and serving customers in the drive-thru. During that part-time stint with Chick-fil-A, 2007, I took a full-time job here at the St. John's Town Center. That was where I got my start. The operator's name is Jeff Busey. He's still there, and I get to work alongside him today, which is fun. But I didn't know where it was going to go, but I knew I liked it. It was the type of company that I wanted to be with. And really, because my life was on mission to serve the Lord, is when I heard the Chick-fil-A corporate purpose that really cemented it to me that this is something, Lord, I think I could do this. And so here's the corporate purpose. And I actually have this picture. I took this picture from our corporate office in Atlanta. It's in Truett's handwriting, which is pretty cool. So this is Truett's handwriting. The corporate purpose of Chick-fil-A: to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And, and again, going back to 2006, 2007, when I was first starting out, and I go, the company has this purpose. Like, I had been a part of other companies that had vision and values on the wall, but that's not what was actually lived out. But when I found this purpose, and it felt like as best as humanly possible, we were living this out inside the restaurants and at corporate office, I really just fell in love with the company even more. So basically, if you boil down at my mindset and my life at that age, it was, well, that's my life's purpose. How could it not be? I want to glorify God, and I want to have a positive influence on the people around me. And how about a company that believes the same thing? I want to partner with that company. So that process, as John mentioned, you can read on the internet, $5,000 to get a Chick-fil-A franchise. I mean, that's outrageous. It's unheard of. Now it's actually $10,000, but you can't just buy one, right? They say 100,000 applications come in every year for a franchisee, and they pick less than 100. And they say it's harder to get into Chick-fil-A franchisee than it is to get into Harvard, which is crazy. And I'm standing here going, God, I think you want me to do this. But I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody in Atlanta. I don't have any connections. I'm just here working a job. And, was pursuing seminary. Well, in 2009, we had our first son. And at that point, my wife, we decided, way ahead of time, we wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom. And in order to do that, my income needed to be able to support that. And at the time, working for Chick-fil-A, my income did not support that. I was a manager at the town center, and I needed upward mobility, the chance to go up and go on. And if it wasn't there, I would have left Chick-fil-A because I had to support my family. 2010, I got the chance to apply for a corporate program where it's kind of a pipeline for future franchisees. They take you all around the country. You fill in wherever they don't have a franchise owner. If a franchise owner gets terminated, retires, you fill in as a temporary spot. So my wife and I went on the road. We had our one son already. We had our second son on the road. And in that, we went to 6 different cities in the course of a year and a half. We filled in, we did this, we did that. We lived in hotels. And in that process, I was being vetted to become a franchise owner, interviewing and going through courses and things like that. 2011, the opportunity, excuse me, you can't just tell them where you want to go. There's always a list. There's always a line of people in front of you. I wanted to be in the Southeast. I wanted to be in Jacksonville. This was home. But you can't just make that happen. The opportunity has to be there. So there came an opportunity in a mall location in Huntsville, Alabama. Had never stepped foot in there before. And I went to my final interview at Chick-fil-A. At that time, Eric Cathy, who's now the CEO, was the head of HR. And you get to the final interview, it's almost a formality. If you make it to that step, unless a giant red flag comes up, you're in. And they invite your spouse there, and so my wife's along with me, and I'm sitting in the interview process with Eric Cathy, and he says, well, how much time have you spent in the store in Huntsville? Because he's about to hand the keys over to me as a franchise owner. I'm like, well, I haven't been there. Like, he said, well, how do you know you want to live there? And like, well, I've Googled it. My path that last year and a half was, I've been on the road for your company, sir. Like, I've been serving, living at a hotel, living in these temporary assignments. I don't have the finances or the means to travel to Huntsville. But I've talked to people about it. I've researched it. I've looked into it. And so I went into my final interview to become a franchisee, and I didn't get a yes. He said, all right. We finished the interview, and he came back, and his assistant came out and said, well, he doesn't want to give you this opportunity until you've been there. So we're going to pay you and your wife to fly to Huntsville tomorrow. Go look at it. We're going to call you back Friday. This is like a Wednesday. So 2 days later, I get the phone call. And of course, the answer was going to be yes, no matter what. But we got there, we saw it, we liked it, we said yes. And that was 2011, became a franchise owner. The rules within Chick-fil-A, you have to be somewhere a couple years before you can be eligible to relocate. Well, 2015, so I started in 2011 in Huntsville. About 2014, they decided they're going to build this Chick-fil-A in Mandarin. Corporate, to this day, and has been the case, they decide the real estate. So as a franchisee, I didn't pick the spot. Chick-fil-A corporate real estate decides the spots. Once they've selected a spot, they select a franchise owner to operate it. So this was my hometown. This was the dream. And just so happened that, I was just past the eligibility requirements, 2014, where they started interviewing me. Then we had the joy of all joys, 2015 to come home. At that point, we had 2 more daughters in Alabama. And then we had our 5th when we got back to Jacksonville about a year after I opened the first store. So what Truett looked for, this is from his book. It's called How Did You Do It, Truett? Your handout is a little clip from that book. But he says, what do we look for in operators? Strong entrepreneurial spirit, desire to be in business for yourself but not by yourself, willingness to operate the restaurant on a full-time basis, the ability to lead and influence others in a positive way, and results-oriented self-starters. And again, when I was on that ministry path for me, and I started working at Chick-fil-A, I was having a lot of fun in business. Like, I really liked it. And I'm still working with people. I wanted to be a youth pastor, and here I am employing kids. Now as a franchisee of 2 restaurants, as I said in my introduction, I have a bigger youth group than most churches in town. And I see them 3 or 4 days a week. And I have the opportunity to mentor them. I'm not necessarily leading Bible studies with them, but when you think about the trustworthy people that young people have in their lives, besides their parents and maybe aunts and uncles, there's not a lot of options out there. Hopefully, pastor, but not every kid goes to church. Coaches, teachers, when I interview kids, when I do all the final interviews at my restaurants, and I ask them, who's a mentor in your life besides your parents? And almost every time it's a teacher, it's a coach, or it's a youth pastor. But again, there's no guarantee that one kid has all 3 of those in their life. And so God really fueled my passion and my desire for youth ministry and showed me that running this business in Chick-fil-A, even though of course I hire adults as well, this is where he's called me to be, to impact this next generation with biblical values, just as Truett did, to be a light, to show them, again, Christ on display in the workplace. And so that's become my passion, and I love the business aspect of it as well. Obviously, Chick-fil-A handed over to me a turnkey business, but truly we are in business by ourselves. Or not by myself, for myself, but not by myself. I get the chance to lead and dictate how my organization runs, and to have the support of this giant Christ-centered company called Chick-fil-A right behind me. So it's a true pleasure and joy to do that. This is when I got to meet Truett. Well, I had met him a couple times, but this was the day I became a franchise operator. And again, my story and the story of Chick-fil-A all comes down to this man. And he passed away about over a decade ago now, but truly a humble man. Even when he died as a billionaire, you would not meet a more humble person, a more generous person. He didn't even graduate high school. He had like over 35 honorary degrees by the time he died. All these universities had given him all these honorary degrees, but he had a life verse back. There was mention about the public school system. Back when he was a kid growing up in the Great Depression, he was as poor could get. And you could read his book. I highly recommend it. Eat More Chicken, Inspire More People. Autobiography, in addition to how he runs his business. The book is packed full of wisdom, simple wisdom, and it's very, very refreshing this day and age. But he came home with a school assignment from his teacher in elementary school. Pick a life verse, come back and share it, in class. And imagine doing that today in public schools. Isn't that wild? But this was his assignment, and his mom helped him pick this Bible verse, Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, And that's part one of the verses, part two as well. But a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. And here is this man this young boy who is living in the projects in Atlanta. They're running a boarding house out of their home because they didn't have any money. It was hard times. And that life verse tracked with him his whole life. It was his good name. And as I said, we still mention Truett every day in our business. It's his good name that kept the company going. It wasn't the riches, it wasn't the success, it was his good name. And I want to share just a peek back to that. That was in 2015 when we opened my first restaurant. That's Dan Cathy, Truett's son. He was the president of Chick-fil-A for 20 plus years. He had since passed the baton on to his son, Andrew, who's around my age, who is now the CEO of Chick-fil-A. But this is the humble beginnings of Chick-fil-A right here. If anybody's seen this picture before, this is Hateville, Georgia. It was called the Dwarf Grill. You can see it up there in the corner. The Dwarf Grill. This is where Chick-fil-A started. 1946, he got out of World War II. He and his brother took out a small loan, put some cash down, and opened this business. It was a tiny, tiny little diner. Of course, this was not Chick-fil-A. This was the Dwarf Grill. It was right across the street from where Delta was putting their headquarters and a Ford manufacturing plant. And he figured running a 24-hour diner next to a place that has 24-hour shift work and Delta headquarters would be a good place to put it. It's still there today, except it looks a little different. It had been remodeled over the years. Well, while he's running this business, he comes up with an opportunity. Delta, who was, again, his neighbor, started serving chicken on the airplanes for meals. And they served a portion of the chicken that had to be a certain size in order for their cookers to cook it and all this stuff. And they ended up with this chicken supplier saying, well, we need somebody else to buy the rest of the chicken because Delta only wanted this section, but what about the chicken breast? And so Truett got a good deal on this supplying some chicken breasts, and he started messing around with this idea of the chicken sandwich. They weren't famous for the inventor of the chicken sandwich. Like, it didn't exist. It's commonplace today, but he called it the chicken steak sandwich. That was his the first name of it. A breaded piece of chicken on a hamburger bun. He worked for that recipe for years. He actually franchised out when he got his recipe finished, the recipe that we still use today. He franchised out just the sandwich, and so you could go get a Chick-fil-A sandwich inside a Waffle House, outside a gas station. And what he realized back in those early days was that people were not taking care of his good name. The product that he worked so hard to make, they were cooking it all in the morning. They'd cook 100 sandwiches in the morning and leave it there all day, and the quality's not good, doesn't taste right, it's old. And so as he first tried to do that, he canceled all those contracts. He pulled it all back in-house, and he opened a second Dwarf Grill. His story is full of adversity. His brother died in a plane crash. Both his business partner and brother died in a plane crash. And I think about this all the time. If he'd have given up and just said, you know what, I just want this one little restaurant, I want this one family little diner, like myself, 3,000 other Chick-fil-A operators, and you figure over 1 million Chick-fil-A team members would never get the chance to do what we get to do and be this, God-fearing, Christ-centered business in this country. He could have given up, and then his second restaurant burns to the ground. And then so he goes from 1946 to 1967 is when the first Chick-fil-A was built. And the 60s, again, all this is before my time. I'm sharing the story, but inside the shopping mall in Greenbrier Mall, Atlanta, Georgia. So, and what's cool about this, most people don't know this, the first Chick-fil-A franchise operator was actually a woman. So there was a woman who was the first franchise operator of Chick-fil-A. Shopping malls were blowing up all over the country, but food courts weren't. Truett actually was the pioneer of food courts and malls. He convinced the Greenbrier Mall that was mostly going to be like a clothing boutique mall to add a restaurant. It was very tiny, and because it was so small, he was a restaurateur. He had this sandwich that he was feeling really good about. He didn't create a whole diner. He just created a Chick-fil-A with a Chick-fil-A sandwich, fries, coleslaw, ice cream, a couple basic things that are still on our menu today. And this was 20 years after he had started his restaurant. You think about this, he's in his 60s and he's starting Chick-fil-A. I mean, how cool is this to think about? We in our culture now, and this was not that long ago, I think 60s retirement age. He's starting a company that's going to blow up and become this huge thing in his 60s. And so Chick-fil-A started then, and for 20 years, as y'all probably know, you could only get it in the malls. It was the only place you get Chick-fil-A. It wasn't until the late 80s that they built the first freestanding restaurant, which is what most of us know Chick-fil-A at today. So his story of perseverance to go, well, he opened the restaurant, his business partner and brother died in a plane crash. He opens a second restaurant, that second restaurant burns down. And then to have the foresight to go, we're gonna expand our brand nationwide through shopping malls. This is our avenue of our wave to grow our brand. And then realizing in the late 80s, because we could have gone the way of Sbarro. Sbarro is still, you can only get it in the malls. We could have stayed that route. Hey, shopping malls is our bread and butter. That's what we do. They didn't do that. They started the first drive-through restaurant in 1988, also in Atlanta, Georgia. And now today, it's most of the shopping malls that Chick-fil-A was in are either the malls have gone bad, Chick-fil-A's pulled out. There are still malls that exist, mall Chick-fil-A's, but the majority of the restaurants are freestanding restaurants, as you've seen. With 2 or 3 car lanes or more. There's some unique concepts out there. This is the reason I include this picture. This is 3 generations of Cathy family members. So Truett on the far end there, Dan and Bubba, his 2 sons, and then the combination of their sons and a nephew here, Mark, Andrew, and John. Again, these guys are about my age, and they're really the heads, the VPs. Andrew's the CEO of the company now. But when you think about the success of Chick-fil-A, this generation has vowed, my generation has vowed, we will never open on Sundays. We will not sell. And not only that, but you figure they're 3 of about 16 family members in their generation who have equal ownership in this company. It is split evenly. And so this generation, Dan and Bubba, his generation, have invested heavily in passing down the family business, because most family businesses fail going from the 3rd to 4th generation. The ones that are fortunate enough to make it to 3, very few make it to 4. And so they're committed. They've hired people. I've taken Harry up to Atlanta. We've met some of these people that again, Harvard professionals that study this stuff of how do you carry on a successful family business. So that's the key there. There's the corporate purpose. In stone, outside the front office. Again, I emphasize that it doesn't change. That has been our founding statement. And I read it to you earlier. That came in 1982, when for the first time since Truett started Chick-fil-A, the company was decreasing in sales, interest rates were through the roof, and that trial is what created that statement. But going through that trial is what led them to go, why do we exist? Why are we even in business? And it's not about chicken. It's not about drive-thrus. It's about glorifying God and having a positive influence on people. And this is our vision statement. So the purpose doesn't change. The vision statement's refreshed over the years, but this is our mountaintop. Our mountaintop is not a dollar. Of course, we track dollars. Of course, we have goals. Of course, we have numbers. But our mountaintop is we want to be known by one word, and that one word is care. That we can be, when people leave our restaurants, they go, nobody cares like Chick-fil-A cares. And of course, other fast food places, hopefully, are way different. But even other retail, anything, I want people to leave my restaurants and go, I'm so glad I went there. Nobody cares the way Chick-fil-A cares, to the glory of God. So thank you.